Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Oh, the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. That's the song that's been playing in my head because it is warm outside, and I'm so excited that it's warm outside and the sun is out and it's not windy.
Snow is melted.
There's melted snow. Everything's flooded and muddy.
Now, wait a minute. We're saying all of this, and we should always say, as of this recording, because it is March in Kentucky and it might be snowing. It could be 70 degrees.
It's true.
Either one. We are in a transitional zone. So, yeah.
I know we don't like to put specific things, but when it's this beautiful right now, you just have to talk about it. Okay.
You do.
Don't drag me down, Ray.
Hey, as of this recording, the sun is shining. What's the temperature out? I don't know, 60 plus degrees here.
Yeah, it was 20 last week or lower. Yeah. Negatives, right?
It was single digits at my house last week during the night.
And snow forecasted for next week, maybe just a little bit of snow. So this is perfect. I mean, this is perfect. This is Kentucky.
I have tulips. We're video recording, nice. So
are those tulips that you grew?
Yeah. So, little sunshine in our life. All right. What is your favorite spring thing to see? I'm going to ask everybody on the pod.
Oh, man.
Jessica,
somebody's going to take it. So.
Thing. I'm not even saying flower. I'm saying thing.
I went to flower instantly. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to go straight to daffodils. Let me call them by the colloquial term, Easter lilies. But yeah.
Not Easter lilies, narcissus. Yeah. What are you talking about?
Yes, narcissus. I'm using all of the other terms, the local terms that Easter I hear them called. Yeah.
People call them buttercups, right? But they're not, because we all know what the other buttercups are.
Tulips are actually buttercups. Fun fact.
So many terms for them.
Narcissus. Annie called me that recently. I did not know that it was a flower. I'll be sure to pass that along.
She thinks you're a beautiful.
There'd been something else she was calling
golden yellow flower.
Well,
I was captivated by my own reflection in a pool of water in the woods, so that might have been.
There you go. Yeah,
perfect. We know what Brett's favorite thing to look at is in the woods. So
himself.
Himself
in clear water without ice. That's his favorite thing in the spring. We have a guest on the pod. Brandon, tell us what your favorite thing, the first thing to see in spring is. What says spring to you?
What says spring to me? Well, just when the trees start blooming. I mean, we and they, I spent a lot of time in the southeastern part of the state in Bell County, and so serviceberry is one of the first trees that really starts kicking off those white blooms. So I know when I was down there, that was something I would see. The alternative, which I think we'll probably talk a little more about later today, that I know spring is here, is when the calorie pear starts blooming, but that's not a good thing. So
a tree that smells like feet.
Yeah. And it's amazing how many of those that you don't see that you do see when the blooms come on. We get calls every spring on those things, and they have such a showy display, and they just spread so prolifically now that there's just entire disturbed sites of those things. It looks like they've been planted, but the calorie pear.
So, Brandon, why don't you introduce yourself to listeners, viewers, all these true leaves we have out there. Who are you? Why are you here?
Well, appreciate y'all having me on the show. My name's Brandon Howard. I'm the director of the Kentucky Division of Forestry, and I also serve as Kentucky's state forester. So honored to have that role and trying to lead this agency and just promote all things forestry across the Commonwealth.
That's awesome. So you do a lot with urban forestry, right? As the state forester, do you?
Well, urban forestry is a component. I mean, there's urban forestry. There's stewardship. That's rural forestry, so to speak. Forest inventory and analysis. We go find out what's in the woods all across the state. We do fire suppression, forest health. The list goes on and on.
Now, every forester that I've ever known has an interesting backstory, kind of how they got to where they are today kind of thing. So what leads someone like yourself to kind of be the head forester of the state of Kentucky and the division? I mean, did you grow up in the woods or what was it?
Well, I was I was born in Perry County, there in Hazard. Lived in Breathitt County the first part of my life, and so I think that kind of set the foundation. There's a lot of forest in the eastern part of the state compared to central Kentucky, and so I kind of always remembered that because we ended up moving to Scott County when Toyota came in back in about 1989. The family did, and so moved me out of the forest into central Kentucky, and so that played a role in the back of my mind, and kind of wanting to get back to the forest in eastern Kentucky. So that's what I did. I went back and spent some time down there and ended up coming back to central Kentucky. So I don't know how that happened.
We drag you back.
Now, my wife is from Mercer County, Mashila, and so Jessica knows her well, so we ended up moving back to Mercer County there. So that kind of contributed as well.
So Brandon, this might make you uncomfortable, and if so, mission accomplished. But why do you like forests? Why do you like plants? What is it about it that you like? I realize, as I said, this may make you uncomfortable. It could have gone in any number of directions, but it's just more of a touchy-feely. That's
I was
my
wondering
role.
where you were going with that. Yeah.
And my role on the podcast is to encourage us to talk about just the why, a little bit of the joy or the meaning or the whatever. We've all talked about this in the past, and I'm just curious what your reason is.
Yeah. I feel that the forests are peaceful. I feel like if you go to the forest, the trees don't talk back, and just kind of hang out in the forest and get away from the everyday craziness, that we deal with, and whether it be in the cities or whether it be wherever it may be. It just seems like the forest is a good place to go, kind of find some peace, and I always like that about the forest.
Well, you're with a good group here because all of us being plant people, I think that's one thing we all like about working with our plants.
They don't talk back.
They don't talk back to you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Sometimes they scream at you for water. I feel that way sometimes. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. But
I did start my career with going. My major was animal science, and so I changed.
Oh.
Jessica
you got
knows
back on the right
that
track. You got back on the right track. Now, where did you begin your degrees at, as far as that goes? Was it University of Kentucky? Did I read that somewhere? Or
well, that's where I finished. But I went to Morehead State University.
Oh, good program down there at Morehead.
For 2 years, and that's where I was an animal science major. And then I just decided that, hey, I want to try to get into forestry, and so in Kentucky, the University of Kentucky is the place for an accredited forestry degree, and so I headed back to Central Kentucky again. So if you can see, I'm doing this between Eastern Kentucky and Kentucky, back and forth quite a bit in my life.
Go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say, at what point through your career leading to this position you're currently in, I think when I crossed paths with you, you were you state fire chief, or what was that title? Because I know with some of the other foresters I currently work with, when it becomes fire season, it's like all hands on deck, right? Because you guys can suddenly be called all at once to go, obviously, and attend and control some of these forest fires because we don't want things to escalate, get out of hand.
Well, our principal responsibility in the Division of Forestry is wildfire suppression, and that's no matter what we do in the agency. When the Commonwealth is burning, we stop that and we go to the thing that to protect lives and infrastructure and all that good stuff. And so coming up, I told you I started in southeastern Kentucky down in Bell County, and there's a lot of wildfire down there. Any of y'all know anything about eastern Kentucky know that that's kind of the epicenter of wildfire. And so I spent a lot of time on wildfire throughout my career. And so when I moved I took a job in Frankfort as the state forest section supervisor, just over all our public lands. But I had that wildfire component in my background because that's what we did. I fought fire just as much as I did anything else. And so the position opened up to be the fire chief, as we call it here in the Division of Forestry. And so I got that position before I got this position. And so then at that time, I was just over all wildfire operations in the state.
Is that like the title of this episode? I feel like forestry for when the Commonwealth is burning, because I think that would get listeners. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
That would draw some people in for sure.
I always dreaded the fall time
Very
of the year in the
evocative.
eastern part of the state when you'd start to see that haze in the air and smell the
Mhm.
smoke in a really dry fall. I always dreaded that because some falls during a very dry period, it seems like it's just there were a lot of fires, and I always dreaded that. I grew up in Johnson County, just outside of Paintsville, and we would just see this haze in the fall. But we saw the forestry crews, and us kids were always just enthralled with the crews and talking to them when we would see them working or whatever, and we would harass them as much as we could if we ever saw them around the farm, if they were parked somewhere as kind of staging an operation or whatever. But you said I'm sure you do other things besides fire control and management. What's a kind of a typical day for you look like? I know you must cover just a tremendous amount of ground in your job as far as all of your roles and hats you have to wear.
Well, with this position, my office time increases where I came from, basically, just because all those aspects I talked about. We basically have two areas that we focus on. We put it in forest protection, which is wildfire, forest health, and enforcing BMPs, best management practices on logging sites, and then forest management, which is our state forest public lands, our tree nurseries. I don't forget about that. We grow tree seedlings, and urban and community forestry, stewardship, and a variety of other things. And so, a typical day is usually just trying to provide leaders' intent is the right word, I think, to our managers who report to me. I have 11 people that directly report to me. So just providing them with some, the leaders' intent, the guidance to kind of, and the guidance that I get from commissioner and secretary above me and down from the governor, obviously, that to try to help move the division in the right way that we need it to be there for the citizens. And some of the best times I have in this position is when I actually get to leave this office and go out and visit, our staff, employees, and see what great work they're doing, because obviously that's boots on the ground where the citizens are getting a positive impact.
Oh yeah, anytime, any day out of the office is a good day. I think all of us could definitely agree with that. And you mentioned, and all the things that you were covering, is one of the things you mentioned is a big part of Bourbon County as far as a local soil conservation district. They always have a tree giveaway, and they source those materials, those trees, through you all. And you said there's 2 tree farms in the state that you all still manage and work with. Is that right?
That's right. We have one over in Marshall County, John P. Rhodey Nursery, and then and that's in the west, and then we have one in Morgan County, which is we call the Morgan County Tree Nursery. So they produce bare root seedlings, 1 to 2 year old, and partnering with conservation districts is something we're proud of, because, and we even have a matching program to where, they purchase a certain number and we can match with a certain number to kind of help bolster their efforts. And so they're a big partner.
Now, can anybody order from those? I was really excited when seems like you guys went to, at a point, an online ordering system for those materials. And I was looking on there today before the program today, and I could see what was in stock, what was out of stock. But can anybody order from that, or just conservation districts? How do people interface with that program?
Yeah, anybody can. If they just go to our website, EEC, as in Energy Environment Cabinet, so eec.ky.gov, they can navigate through the Department of Natural Resources to forestry, and they should be able to find where they can link up to our online tree store, tree seedling store. But yeah, it's a service that we provide for the Commonwealth and have for decades. And so we want people to get out there, and if they have a need to plant some trees, to try to source them from Kentucky. That's what we try to provide.
Fantastic selection of trees, and I love the way you guys have it laid out, and you have it clearly labeled if it's a nut producer or some of the other qualities of the trees. But yeah, great native selection. Yeah.
As I've worked more with some of the foresters locally over the last couple of years, I've realized there's a definite correlation between how some of the foresters and extension agents are, some of the things that they offer that's kind of similar to what we do, like how we go out to farm visits or home visits, and they also will go out and help with making decisions on. I know I've over the last couple of years have a lot of people who've bought property and they want to reforest it, right? And how do you go about doing that? Are you just going to plant trees and let them go, and then a lot of the foresters can come in and be like, well, no, you got to manage those invasive species and stuff. And I know that's something you all deal with too, is like same as we do with these invasive plant species coming in, invasive insect pests that are coming in. You guys kind of take the lead on, especially in the forest areas with those and how they'll, be affecting things in the future.
Yeah. And, I do want to add, you're talking about different partners and everything. Cooperative extension, I mean, you all are one of our biggest partners, and any chance I get, I try to, some maybe, y'all talked about Eastern Kentucky, the trees are more visible. And then in Central Kentucky, it may be more focused on agriculture and things like that. But, I've tried to do my best to coordinate with, extension leadership or other agents to just try to, there are opportunities, like Jessica said, to promote forestry even in, places like Central Kentucky. And so I'm looking for opportunities to work with extension agents all across the state, no matter if you're in a heavily forested area or a lightly forested area, there's a tree growing somewhere in the county. So
it's amazing when I would do tree programs in Floyd County. We worked a lot with forestry and BMPs and things like that on the logger end of things, but it was sort of a different sort of thing. We have just as much interest. We were talking a little bit earlier, but before the show, I think, and I went from Floyd County as a county agent to Bourbon County as a county agent, one of the, 84% plus forested area in Floyd County, to Bourbon County, around 2% or so forested. There's just as much interest in Bourbon when if we have any kind of tree related program. People are very interested. And somebody made the joke one day in Bourbon County. They said, well, maybe if you were in the eastern part of the state, we had a lot of interest in Floyd County, but they said maybe they couldn't see the forest for the trees, meaning that trees are just an integral part. And at some point, maybe you just don't think about it in the same way. But I still have crowds in Central Kentucky, just as much interest. It's a little bit different focused, a lot fewer trees, but the interest is just there. No matter where I've been in the state, the interest in trees and urban and more rural area forestry, there's interest everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Feels like it's an easy thing to like hook your wagon to. Trees are, I don't know, maybe that's just the plant nerd in me, but we've talked about like the monarch and the honeybee, right? Save the monarch, save the honeybee. It's like an easy thing for people to latch onto. It feels like trees are one of those, whether that's like Brett and you're doing bonsai and it's just like a really cool artistic way of doing that, or you have a fruit or nut producer, or just you're wanting to shade your home in the summertime. It's just like planting a tree, even if it's hot and gross outside, will make you feel good about yourself, I think. And so it's an easy thing to like convince people they should do if they have the space for it. And the interest in the natives, of course, maybe that stems out of the honeybee monarch, push for natives. I don't know, but the interest in native trees really seems to have jumped in my 11 years in extension. Are you seeing that as well, as far as like how many trees are leaving the nursery, or questions you get, Brandon?
Well, you said native trees jumping. I think the reason that people are thinking about native trees is because the invasive exotic trees are jumping.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's the thing about your pair that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, Mercer County, the county that I live in, drive down the road here in a couple of weeks, and you will see some beautiful stands of 15 to 20 foot trees with white flowers. Unfortunately, that's Callery pear that's escaped from the Bradford pear that folks used to like to plant, still do. And then now you've got a tree that's shading out your natives, and Well, it's just a thorny tree that's really hard to deal with. And so I think people are starting to realize that um, native trees were able to, they were just part of the landscape and they worked better. And you talked about, I mean, there's positives with, I guess you could look at short term. I mean, you know, you mentioned bees. There's a burst of nectar, and then you can get honey flow from invasives. But the problem is you don't. The natives will provide a sustained nectar flow throughout the entire season. So you may be happy at the beginning and the end of the season, but those invasives crowded out all your natives, and so now you don't have anything when you normally would have a nectar flow. So you got to look at it from both sides.
And I'm sure that natives are, I mean, I hate to ask such a broad question like the greatest threats to, forests that we have in the state now, but I'm sure that non-native species are close to the top as far as we're talking about threats to our forested lands in Kentucky. Would that be a correct assumption that natives are, or non-native species are way up there, the invasives?
I always add, I always just, when I get to ask this question, it's forest health. And forest health umbrella includes uh, combating non-native invasive insects and plants. Yeah. So when you think about insects, especially in central Kentucky, the emerald ash borer, I mean, uh,
Yeah.
our white
Big
ash
impact.
trees and green ash trees were, decimated. And that's what most of the stands in central Kentucky were ash trees. And so, stand changing events. Some things aren't as big. They come through. We can keep them at bay, do a good job, and then some things we just can't stop. In plants, there's plants that are just like that as well.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know for sure. I guess our conversation is naturally leading in this direction. But a guy by the name of Billy Thomas, I don't know if you bump into Billy Thomas through the Department of Forestry at UK. When we were both kind of extension agents together in the East, he said something one time that just really changed the way I looked at forestry. He said we were talking about just trees. We were in some forested area on a trail somewheres, and he said it's just crazy to think that this is a long-term perennial crop. And I stopped for a minute and I thought that was an odd statement. He said a perennial crop, almost like one of Alexis's flowers. I was like, a perennial crop? That's an interesting way to look at it. But that kind of led into the economic impact that forests have on Kentucky and then even beyond. But I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that. But he was throwing around some huge numbers even years ago of the impact that forest and forest products have on Kentucky.
Yeah, yeah. It's the rotation age is longer. Corn's got a year, an annual rotation age. Now we're dealing with 80-year rotation ages and 70-year rotation ages. Things that you do now you may not see. But
Right.
your offspring will. But yeah, it's in the economic impact is in the billions with a B. So it's somewhere around 10 billion. I'd have to look at the exact numbers. Some things have changed, but I mean, it is a major economic driver in both in primary and secondary wood production. The loggers that are taking the trees out, they're providing an economic benefit. The sawmill is providing an economic benefit, whether it's a white oak going to a bourbon stave. Bourbon can only be made from white oak, with a white oak barrel, or whether it's going to red oak flooring or some sort of cabinetry, walnut, whatever. Major impact in the state, and I think it doesn't need to be overlooked for sure.
Yeah, you mentioned the white oak. I had a question the other day, and now's the perfect time to ask it, I guess. And that someone asked me in Bourbon County. I guess that product was on their mind in Bourbon County. But they said, "Do we still have white oak in Kentucky to any amount to support the bourbon industry?" And I know some work was going on with that, with the makeup of the forest and taking white oak into consideration. But do we still have some stands that supply that industry? I guess, don't we?
Yeah, there are stands of white oak. And the concern was that the trend, the long-term trend, like we talked about, it's a long rotation age. And so we want to think about what's going to happen in 30, 40, 50 years, whatever the number may be. And if we see the trend go, the usage of white oak outpacing the growth rate, then we need to think about doing some things to kind of promote white oak. There was a white oak initiative that was started. It's a standalone group now who they try to promote good policy and legislation to support white oak, and so and then all foresters, white oak is a premier species regardless. Mm-hmm. It's good for wildlife. It's good for a lot of things, and so we're hyper focused. And if nothing else, the conversation keeps us hyper focused on white oak and trying to promote white oak. And invasive species like we talked about coming in, they're taking over some white oak stands, or a lot of different stands, and just general land use changes, And so there's enough white oak now. We just have to continue to have good practices for decades down the road.
Yeah, I know it's very hard to plan that far ahead. Yeah.
The only trees my husband wanted to be able to identify were the white oak group and the red oak group, because he's a hunter and he was like, that's all I care. All he cares about being able to identify. If he doesn't think if it's not an oak, he doesn't care. And if it is an oak, he wants to know if it's white or red. And so that's fun to take him out in the woods. I'm like, what's that? What's that? Yeah. What's that?
Looking for
I bet your kids know a bunch of trees, and your family
my kids do know a bunch of trees. Their mom and I, we try to take them to as many events. I mean, they're big into 4-H. That's another.
I was going to say, like, he didn't touch on the fact that he is also an all-star extension volunteer for multiple programs and a 4-H club leader currently, because I went with them when until the only time it rained and stormed last year, since we were in a drought. The lightning ran us off and we went on a tree walk. So
so my wife and I, we lead the Natural Resources Club in Mercer County, 4-H, and so we've got pretty good attendance, and the kids have done pretty good at some competitions. We participate in the forestry competitions, and there's more than just forestry. I mean, wildlife, you name it. And so I don't know if it was Jessica or somebody there at the office said we were an extension family, because
I see them once a week, probably. So
he just happens to also have a really cool job.
Yes, really cool job. So.
Well, I have a question for you, I really, one of my favorite things about this podcast is the opportunity to see how other people think about a thing. So I was going to be a confession, but you softened it for me, so I don't have to feel like I'm, in front of a jury. But my wife and I recently had a pretty substantial Bradford pear cut down in our front yard.
And it was the biggest one I've ever seen, like ever.
It was like maybe not state champion Bradford pear, but in good branch angles, like never shattered and fell on anything. Like everything about it was just weird. But on the one hand, getting rid of this invasive thing, okay, cool. On the other hand, it was, I don't know, 28 inches at breast height, maybe. I mean, it was a pretty big, maybe a little bit bigger than that. I don't know. How do you, what's your calculus in, why you would or wouldn't do that? You're killing an old tree. There's a part of me that feels sad, even though, that thing's gone now. We live in Lexington, suburban area. We don't have a lot of trees. So, one's missing. It's a bigger issue than if you have thousands in your.
I passed his house up the last time because I didn't see the tree in the front yard. I was like, wait, where am I?
So what do you say to that? What do you say to me, murderer / conservationist? Question mark.
Well, first off, there's no such thing as a state champion Bradford pear, because we do not measure that.
Because you know that I would win. Because you know that I would win.
Yeah,
that's why you're trying to keep me down, Brandon.
That's
like being the best at the worst, Brett. I'm just going to put that out there. Wow.
Yeah. And I would suggest, if you feel bad about it, after you cut it down, have a bowl made out of it and put it on the shelf so you can look at it, because that's all it's good for. And I hate to be that way, but So here's the problem with Bradford pear. I mean, it's supposed to be this thing that doesn't spread. You plant it and it stays in that one spot. And that's fine if everybody in your neighborhood has Bradford pear. Well, your neighbor down the road decides to plant a different kind of pear. Well, here comes the wind, there goes the pollen. Before you know it, boom, calorie pear everywhere. And so you played a role in spreading this nuisance pest of a plant. So,
to be clear, Brandon, I am not 60 years old, nor did I plant this tree all those years ago.
He did cut it down though, so we're giving him
props. I did pay of course, insured certified arborist.
Oh, very nice.
Remove this tree safely.
Yeah. So you are part of the solution then.
Thanks, Brandon. I knew you.
So you should not feel bad.
Okay.
Okay. What are you going to put in its place, Brett? Anything? That's my question.
Yeah.
I always want to know what's
what are you going to put back in there?
So we got the order out. We got it out of order. We planted something before we cut it down, but because it was like there was like a program available through the city to be able to plant like a pretty decent ball and burlap Kentucky yellowwood.
Oh.
Okay.
It was like one of the most quirky ones that they had, and we have a little tulip poplar in the front yard and a little bald cypress and some sweet gum in the back, a couple of dogwoods that have been there for forever.
So was it some sort of program to where if you took it down, you'd get something like a bounty program? Or?
No, it was just independent. It was just there was an opportunity to get a free tree if you worked with them, and we did that. And in order to make that work, we were going to have to take this one down. And we'd been wanting to for a while, and we were going to do it last year, but didn't work out. So yeah, it was literally they're completely taking it down was just to provide space for the one that we got for free.
And now you can brag to your neighbors. If you have any neighbors who question you about why did Brett take down that beautiful tree, you're like, the head of the Division of Forestry told me I'm doing a good job.
Well, my next door neighbor has a terrible, terrible Bradford pear allergy, so he's extremely stoked about.
He's happy, yeah.
Yeah, not another spring.
You're fighting a good fight, man. I appreciate that.
Will you? I just love the idea of these bounty programs that are popping up. One, because it just sounds so like aggressive.
Yeah, of course you would like that, Alexis. You would.
But can you explain those a little bit and maybe just like why they pop up in some places and not other places? I'm not sure if you have a full answer there, but I know Jessica probably gets calls, and I always got calls in Boyle County about like, why aren't we doing that?
Yeah. Well, and our agency helps support communities that try to do that, and whichever way we can, whether it be through helping them with some type of service or whatever. But anytime you do a bounty program, then when you think of bounty, you think about you get something in return, obviously, and so that's why I was thinking that that might have been the situation earlier, was because if you take down a nuisance like Bradford pear and then you get something to go back in its place, that just incentivizes property owners to go away from the species. And so rather than just say, hey, cut a tree down and go out and find your own. So, sometimes communities that have a better funding source, maybe an urban community, may be able to do that versus a smaller community that just doesn't have the budget. So you see that a lot more in your larger cities, but it's a good thing. I mean, any community that's doing that is definitely doing a good service for everybody in the community.
Down with
I guess we did a DIY bounty program.
It seems like a big job. I mean, you look at all these trees everywhere, so every one that you take out of the ecosystem, I guess, is a win when we're talking about these invasives. It's going to take everybody to address this issue. It's a big one. Another real quick question for you, Brandon, is let's say I have 10, 15 acres, 20 acres, and I'm somewhere in the state of Kentucky, and I'm just a landowner. How do you guys interface with landowners that may have a question if they're looking for a little bit of help? I guess I'm asking, what could you guys offer like landowners directly? I know you guys have a far-reaching system that you're in charge of.
Yeah, our biggest focus is service, more so than just um, financial assistance. So if it's kind of what we specialize in, and so we have what we call service foresters in the state, all across the state. And if someone, that same website I told you about earlier, eec.ky.gov, if they go there, they can find their county and which field office is assigned that particular county, and they can just call the number on there and start a conversation with our foresters, and then we'll have someone they'll do fill out an application, and we'll have a forester come out and visit their property. And a lot of times we do this in conjunction with Kentucky Fish and Wildlife, because sometimes landowners, it's all about what the landowner's goal is. I mean, it could be timber production, that's where we specialize, or it could be wildlife uh, enhancement. Sometimes they kind of go hand in hand. So we work hand in hand with our fish and wildlife colleagues and try to provide a good service to the citizens. So all they have to do is call.
I'm glad to hear you guys have that partnership still. I know that's a great 1-2 combo. Those two organizations working together. That's a heck of a strong combination.
Yeah, I was looking back at statutes back from 1912 and when we were created, and the Kentucky Fish and Wildlife was created, pretty much about the same time. So we've got a long history of working together. We're some of the uh, original government in Kentucky, really.
I have a two-part question.
No.
Oh no!
Sorry,
here we go.
Brett.
Complicated.
One, have you heard of, and I'm hoping you say no, have you heard of beech leaf disease? Beech is one of my favorite trees, so I'm a little panicked.
Well, I've heard of a disease dealing with beech, but I don't think it's not like on our major radar. So
Sweet.
Good.
Yeah. I've only a good friend of mine is a entomologist for the state forestry department in New Hampshire, and that's where they're finding it, like northeast. And I was up there, and he was like, "Oh yeah, all of our beaches are dying." And I was like, "What?" So
well, now
I was
like, caveat. As soon as I say that, though,
yeah, that's true. I
probably
brought it up.
somewhere in Kentucky, somebody's probably gonna listen and say, "Wait a second,
Wait,
that guy's
I
wrong."
have one. Yeah.
And see, this is why I'm not a county agent anymore. I'm not going to field these phone calls. But yeah, it's a
Bruno, give me your
nematode
number,
that
Lexi.
spreads, that like feeds on the
Oh.
buds and spreads this disease to American, European, Oriental beech. So, but that leads me into my true question of, is there a invasive, whether it's insect or plant, that you are worried about? Maybe it's not here or not here in big numbers.
And we're not gonna end on such a downer of a question.
I was
Holy
gonna ask him
moly.
what his favorite trees were after that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Trying to bring it
This
up.
is important, Brett. People need to know.
I know it's important. It's making me stressed. I'm feeling stressed personally.
I'm making him sweat.
as a listener.
Well, the thing in the news is the spotted lanternfly, but I'm not worried about that from a forestry aspect. Forestry,
Yeah.
they come to the tree of heaven, but from you horticultural folks, you should be worried about that.
Yeah.
So we'll mention that. So maybe I am worried about that the most since I'm on your all's podcast. So
Yeah.
Play the audience.
So I am worried about that. Well, from a forestry standpoint, in trees, the spongy moth, formerly known as gypsy moth, has been hanging out on the edge of eastern Kentucky for years, and slow the spread programs worked, and it has slowed. But if those things inch in here and they start taking out your white oak and red oak, then that's not good. And so they eat the leaves and they'll kill they'll stress the trees. So I hope that stays at bay, but that's kind of a worry that every now and then crosses my mind. I hope it doesn't happen.
We should put a link to that program in the notes, just for people who maybe want to make sure they're doing all they can to stop the spread of stuff, because it's important, Brett, even if it's stressful.
No, I know it's important. We're getting close to the end of time.
Downer,
I just
Alexis.
want to let everybody
then
know we're going to
let's-
end something.
Yeah, well, you should share what your favorite tree is then, Brandon.
Or top three.
Or maybe like what's a tree species that you would love to see more people out there
What's
planting?
underrated? Yeah.
Brett always has good questions.
Well, everything's site dependent. I mean, take yellow poplar, also known as tulip poplar, and stick it on a dry ridge top, then the tree's not going to make it. You know, and so it's a cove species. It needs well drained, moist soil. So, I've always been a fan of yellow poplar. I mean, it's our state tree, but just growing up, starting out in Breathitt County, there was a lot of yellow poplars there, and we used to have one right there in the middle of our driveway. We drive on each side of it. And as a kid, you know how it is in Eastern Kentucky. That's just how it is. You gotta. That was the only place we could put our driveway. So I remember watching that tree grow as a kid. And so I kind of something about yellow poplar. I think that goes back to my childhood, but just the oak species, white oak and red oak. I like them all, and we have produced some maple syrup over the years. My family has, and so I do like a good sugar maple stand. So it's all about what you want, what you need. So site dependent.
Seems like this year's been a pretty decent sap flow at a couple of the places that I've talked to. So that's pretty cool. People making syrup. That's pretty cool. Do you have okay, so I guess that's sort of a double. You answered site specific for people out there planting, but that some of your good memories are about
Right tree, right place. We have a pub.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's literally called Right Tree, Right Place.
Yep.
Maybe. Yeah. You can look it up.
Yeah, we have publications for everything. I love the tulip poplar, the biggest saw log I've ever seen. And the most saw logs out of one tree is probably a tulip poplar. They're an incredible tree, but I like that take on things. We were talking about, I guess, a more positive way to finish, Alexis, is we were talking about fond memories. I'll never forget the first time when I was a kid and went towards central Kentucky from eastern Kentucky and saw one of my favorite memories is all the eastern red buds and dogwoods. It just happened to be a year where the blooms coincided and just driving up the mountain parkway. And there's just nothing like it when those start to bloom in the spring and everything works out just right. And you see that splash of purpley, that's a highly technical term, purple color, and then all that white. I mean, it's just, it's an awesome time of the year. And that time of the year is coming up here in Kentucky. And I look forward to it. I really look forward to it.
Absolutely.
You
know what it means to when the red buds bloom, what it's time to do?
What's that?
Jessica probably knows.
If you're going to say something with bees, because Brandon also has not mentioned that he's a big beekeeper as well.
Put the honey supers on. It's time. Put those honey supers on. Start getting that honey in there. So
when the dogwoods
bees
bloom,
are
the
awake.
crappie are biting. I know that one.
Oh, so now we're getting into forest lore. This is a strong way to finish. I like that. We always look forward to honey flow in the eastern part when the locust had a good bloom year and you get locust honey. That was sort of a legendary sort of thing. It's a good time when you get a good straight locust flow, and then the honey that comes off of that is just, it's a good time.
Trying to sidetrack this into bees, but one year Brandon had some honey that was like clear, right? Did we eventually think it was like from the maples blooming?
Yeah, we didn't have, it wasn't tested, but I mean, it was black locust and dominant is what we figured because that's when it was
but it was like completely clear. Like it just barely had like a yellow tint
clear
to it.
honey I've ever seen has been either locust or later on reclaimed strip mine areas. We would get autumn olive made a really clear honey, and you would just get hundreds of acres. I won't even get off on a tangent on autumn olive, but that locust honey it doesn't. I mean, people's like, that's not real honey. I'm like, it's honey, but it's usually you don't get those good pure runs of that. It's just a specific set of occurrences that have to come together to make that beautiful clear honey.
I've got to be honest, honeysuckle is part of that spring honey too in central Kentucky. So invasive, like I talked about earlier, but it's makes good honey. So.
It does.
Well, cool. Any lasting words, Brandon? Anything you want people to take away, definitely to know by the end of this episode?
Just that the Division of Forestry has been around for a long time, and my goal and my leader's intent for this division is to provide the public with a great service and empower them with the knowledge and education to make the decisions they need to make on whether it's on their forests, whether it's which trees to plant in an urban setting. We have people for that, and we know how to point them back to our partners. Like I talked about, Fish and Wildlife. There's the Forest Service. There's you all at UK. I mean, the list goes on and on. So just don't hesitate to reach out. We'd love to help out everybody we can and point them in the right direction, because after all, Kentucky is half forested. That's over 12 million acres of forest, and everything else is likewise. So there's a lot of trees out there, and I know there's a lot to do in the forest. So it's time to get to work.
I like that. Time to get to work. How's that for an ending, Brett? Positive. Time to get to work. Plant them trees.
To be clear, I never suggested that. Brandon, I thought, did great. My criticism was strictly to aim toward you.
Yeah, just Alexis, not the name.
Fair. All right. I'll take the criticism when it's due. But anyways, well, Brandon, we really appreciate you being here and talking trees. I think anybody in this group could talk trees any day, anytime, for as long as possible. But we know you have important things to do because, you're kind of like really important guy, as we talked about. So we really appreciate your time. You all, our listeners, drop us, say Brandon was the best guest you ever had. You want him on more to talk about trees. You're going to contact the Department of Forestry. Just leave that all in a review with your 5 stars. We appreciate it. You can also follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can shoot us an email if you have questions, whether or not you need to find your extension agent or you're not sure what tree to plant, you can shoot us an email, and that is in the show notes along with some other links that we mentioned today. But that is where we're going to wrap it up. We appreciate you all being here today, and we hope you will join us next time. Have a good one.